Ave Maria. Welcome to the History Programme, a monthly series of programmes produced by the Franciscans of the Immaculate for Gate of Heaven Radio. In this series, we will be looking at events in history, famous people in history, including saints and blesseds, foundations of religious orders, and much more. In short, anything in history that has a Catholic perspective. Our objective will be to tell you the facts as recorded by history. We will not be entering into polemics nor aiming to generate any controversy. If we venture an opinion, we will say so. You are free to agree or disagree. This month's programme is entitled Our Lady of Knock, Queen of Ireland. Listeners may recall that in a previous episode of the History Programme, we spoke about the penal times, that period of severe repression against the Catholic faith in England and Ireland prior to the passing of the Catholic Emancipation Act in 1829. The laws that had been enacted by the English government during that period became known as the penal laws. These penal laws had as their aim the complete eradication of the Catholic faith. And in England, with the exception of small pockets around the country, mostly on the estates of the remaining Catholic noble families, the eradication was entirely successful. However, in Ireland it was a different story altogether. The Irish people were to remain steadfast in the Catholic faith in spite of these penal laws. Their land had been taken from them in a succession of plantations by English settlers. Under the penal laws, it was difficult for a Catholic to own land, and he became a tenant on the land, at the mercy of the landowner, more often than not an absentee landlord. A Catholic, for example, could not enter Parliament, could not enter the legal profession, could not own a horse worth more than £5. In other words, he had little or no civil rights, let alone religious rights, in his own country. The children of poor Catholics had to be educated in what became known as hedge schools. In most cases, this instruction was given to children outdoors, sitting beside the hedgerows, hence the name hedge schools. The Irish language was also repressed, and unfortunately this policy was successful. The Irish language eventually disappeared except for small isolated pockets around the country. This was a great cultural loss to the country. In a previous episode, we mentioned that the Mass was effectively banned. For example, it was illegal to be a priest, to say Mass, to harbour a priest. However, the Irish Catholics were not to let themselves be deprived of the holy sacrifice of the Mass, especially now at the hour of their greatest need. They would not let the Mass go the same way as the language. In remote parts of the mountainsides around the country, Mass rocks, in the Irish language, Carrigan-Affron, were built. When I was young, we went on holidays to the west of Ireland, and my father showed us a Mass rock on the hill behind the cottage where we stayed. The Mass rock usually consisted of two large rocks, with a slab of flat rock placed on top, which could be used as an altar for Mass. The faithful risked their lives to assist at these outdoor Masses in the penal times. Lookouts would be appointed to watch out for any English soldiers in the vicinity. The Irish people also had a great devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, especially under the title Mother of God, and a great love of reciting her rosary. Indeed, in the Irish language, two separate words exist for the name Mary. More is the ordinary name of Mary, but Mure is the name used only for Mary, the Mother of God. Interestingly, some scholars believe that devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary under the title Mother of God was introduced into Ireland by St. Patrick himself. This indeed is plausible, as St. Patrick came to Ireland as bishop in 432 AD, that is, 1 year after the Council of Ephesus, when the Blessed Virgin Mary was proclaimed Theotokos, that is, Mother of God. And the Pope who sent him to Ireland was the same Pope at the time of the Council of Ephesus. Up until recent times, it was an Irish family custom, especially in the country, to gather together in the evening and pray the rosary before retiring for the night. Even in the wake of the passing of the Catholic Emancipation Act in 1829, most of the Catholic population in Ireland lived in abject poverty. And as if that was not bad enough, the country was hit by a succession of famines when the potato crop failed due to blight. The most severe famine was the Great Famine of 1845 to 1849, known in the Irish language as An Gorta Mór. About 1 million people died of starvation, and another 1 million people emigrated. And so many emigrants died en route to their destination that the ships in which they travelled became known as coffin ships. In 1879, in the west of Ireland, nothing much had changed. The Catholics in the countryside were suffering from yet another famine, and they lived in fear of eviction from their small tenant holdings. The parish priest of Knock, a small village in County Mayo, was Archdeacon Kavanagh. He was renowned for his sanctity and zeal, and he lived in very frugal circumstances. He knew well the poverty of his parishioners, and he would not take any money for masses from them. Father Kavanagh had a great devotion to the holy souls in purgatory. He decided to celebrate 100 consecutive masses for the holy souls in purgatory. The last mass was celebrated on the morning of the 21st of August, 1879, the morning of the heavenly apparition. In Ireland, the 15th of August, the feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, has always been the premier feast day of Our Lady. Historically, it is known as Lady Day, or in the Irish language, Lá Lahuire Sanor, which means the feast of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the autumn. In the church calendar in force at the time, the Assumption was celebrated by an octave, beginning on the 15th of August and ending on the 22nd. Thus, the 21st of August was the eve of the Assumption octave. For an account of what happened on the evening of the 21st of August, let us turn to the booklet, The Glory of Knock, written by the Irish priest, Monsignor Michael Walsh. It had been raining since about midday, and shortly after 7 o'clock, Margaret Byrne, sister of the sacristan, had gone to lock the church, and on her return saw an unusual brightness over the church. But it never entered her head to see or inquire what it was. She went home and thought no more about it. A short time afterwards, Mary McLaughlin, the parish priest's housekeeper, was on her way to visit Mrs. Byrne, who had returned from a holiday in Lecanvy. To get to the Byrne cottage, Mary McLaughlin had to leave the main road and enter a laneway south of the church, On coming opposite the church, she saw the figures, but she passed on and said nothing, thinking that possibly the Archdeacon had been supplied with these figures from Dublin or somewhere else, and that he said nothing about them. She thought the whole thing strange, but passed on to Mrs. Byrne's house and mentioned nothing of what she saw. Half an hour later, Mary McLaughlin was returning from her visit and was accompanied by Mrs. Byrne's daughter, Mary. When they came near the church gable, Mary Byrne, without having heard anything from Mary McLaughlin, saw the figures, and thinking that they were statues, asked, "When did the Archdeacon put the statues at the gable?" Mary McLaughlin replied, "He never got them, whoever put them there." On coming nearer the gable, Mary Byrne exclaimed, "They are not statues, they are moving. It's the Blessed Virgin." After some little consultation between the two women, Mary Byrne, feeling quite excited, ran home to tell the others of the wonderful sight. The Blessed Virgin was at the church gable. Mary's brother Dominic, a young man of about 20, thought his sister was acting in a very strange way and did not know what to make of her story. However, Dominic and his mother and his sister Margaret and Dominic's niece Catherine Murray all went out, and they too saw the apparition. Mary Byrne, meantime, hurried round to the neighbours living in the immediate vicinity of the church and told them to come out and see the wonderful sight. Soon a small crowd had gathered at the gable, and they stood gazing at the apparition. So what did the people see exactly? Monsignor Walsh describes it for us. According to their own evidence, they saw three figures standing at the church gable wall, about 18 inches or 2 feet above the ground. The central figure was recognised as that of Our Lady. She was wearing a large white cloak fastened at the neck, and on her head was a brilliant crown. She held her hands raised to the level of her shoulders and facing each other. Her eyes were raised towards heaven, as if in prayer. She was raised slightly above the other two figures. On Our Lady's right was a figure recognised as that of Saint Joseph. His hands were joined, his head was slightly bowed, and his body slightly bent towards Our Lady, as if paying her his respects. On Our Lady's left was a figure considered by Mary Byrne to be St. John the Evangelist. She thought this figure to be St. John because she said he resembled a statue of St. John which she had seen in Lecanvie Church. He was dressed like a bishop. He held an open book in his left hand, and he had his right hand raised with the index and middle fingers pointing upwards, as if he were preaching and emphasizing some point. On St. John's left was an altar, full-sized, and on it was a lamb which was facing towards the figures. Just behind the lamb was a cross. St. John was standing in such a position that his back was turned neither to Our Lady nor to the altar, and he was partly facing towards the altar. The altar was in the centre of the gable, just under the window, on a higher level than the figures. Its position was to the east of the figures, but in a line slightly behind them. The figures were full and round, as if they had a body and life, but they spoke no words, and no words were addressed to them. When people approached them, they moved backwards towards the gable. A 75-year-old woman, Bridget Trench, tried to kiss the feet of Our Lady, but she found nothing in her embrace but the wall. A 13-year-old boy, Patrick Hill, saw a rose on Our Lady's brow and angels hovering round the head of the Lamb. The apparition lasted for about 2 hours. It was still daylight when it was first seen, but half an hour afterwards darkness had fallen. The three figures and the altar and the Lamb were surrounded by a soft, brilliant light which covered the whole gable of the church. Half a mile away, 65-year-old Patrick Walsh, whilst out on his land, saw the great light over the church. He thought some people must have made a large fire in the church grounds, and he wondered why they should have lit it so near the church. He considered the light extraordinary. Rain was falling fast at the time, and the people standing before the gable were drenched, but no rain fell where the figures were, even though the wind was from the south towards the gable. Bridget Trench felt the ground under the figures carefully with her hands, and it was perfectly dry. The apparition was witnessed by about 15 people. Sadly, the saintly parish priest was not one of them. News about the apparition spread quickly, both near and far. People flocked to the church, and many extraordinary cures were claimed. The Archbishop of Tuam, Dr. MacHale, established a commission of inquiry to look into the reported apparition and examine witnesses. Archdeacon Kavanagh was a member of the commission. Monsignor Walsh writes that the commission's report stated that the testimony of all, taken as a whole, was trustworthy and satisfactory. We have newspaper reports that the Archbishop believed in the apparition. In 1880, he told a deputation of Limerick pilgrims who visited him on their return journey from Knock that it is a great blessing to the poor people of the West, in their wretchedness and misery and sufferings, that the Blessed Virgin, Mother of God, has appeared amongst them. Unfortunately, Dr. MacHale died in the following year, 1881, and diocesan enthusiasm for Knock did not surge again until half a century later, when a new commission was established to interview the surviving witnesses. As we mentioned earlier, it was not long before extraordinary cures were being claimed. The deaf regained their hearing, the blind regained their sight, cripples walked again. Pilgrims travelled from far and wide to visit the shrine, especially during the Feast of the Assumption. Prominent pilgrims included the Archbishops of Toronto and Tasmania. Australian listeners will also be interested to hear that the Archbishop of Perth, Dr. Clune, stated that he had obtained a cure through the intercession of Our Lady of Knock, and he presented an oil painting to Knock Church in thanksgiving. Monsignor Walsh, in his booklet, gives us an account regarding the message of the Knock apparition. The tableau bears a striking resemblance to some scenes in the Apocalypse, and seems to re-echo the great voice in heaven saying, "Behold, the dwelling of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away." That's from the book of the Apocalypse. Apart from its historical setting, the apparition has a meaning for all time, and a particular relevant message for the present time. Man's final destiny is not attainable in an earthly paradise. Complete fulfillment of human aspirations can come only in the heavenly Jerusalem. The way of the church is the way of the cross. The cross leads to glory. The Lamb, angels and stars of the apparition bear a marked resemblance to the scene of the adoration of the Lamb described by St. John in the Apocalypse. The symbol of the Lamb was used in the Bible first to refer to the future Messiah. Then, when Jesus was beginning his public ministry, St. John the Baptist pointed him out, saying, "Behold the Lamb of God." Finally, the Apocalypse describes the vision of heaven where the Lamb who was slain received the adoration of the whole court of heaven. The Virgin in the apparition also recalls a well-known scene in the Apocalypse where the woman appeared clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Mary, as mother of Jesus and mother of the Church, was given a unique role in God's plan of salvation. In the glory which she enjoys in heaven, she is at once the first flowering of the pilgrim church, and the image of the glory which the whole church hopes to obtain. The book held by St. John in the apparition brings to mind the book of the Apocalypse. It is an invitation to study the Word of God. The message of Knock is fundamentally biblical. The meaning of the message is obtained by prayerful study of the symbols displayed in the apparition. Father Hubert, an Irish Capuchin, in his booklet, Knock, Vision of Hope, has some additional scholarly insights into the meaning of the Knock apparition. We have only time to mention some of them briefly. Number 1, the Holy Souls and the apparition. Father Hubert raises the question whether the Knock apparition was obtained through the intercession of the Holy Souls in purgatory. He puts forward several reasons why this might be the case, which can be summarised as follows. Firstly, the parish priest had just celebrated the last of 100 consecutive Masses for the Holy Souls. Secondly, in a very special sense, Knock is a manifestation of the Eucharistic mystery, for it reveals the Lamb of God, standing as one glorified, on the altar of his own sacrifice. In this we see that the Mass, which had so often been offered in Knock Church for the relief and release of the Holy Souls, is very significantly shown forth in the apparition. For while the souls in purgatory are helped chiefly by the acceptable sacrifice of the altar, the reception of its fruits in the Holy Eucharist is the most effective means by which we may avoid purgatory. Thirdly, the Blessed Virgin Mary, in whose hands had been placed the fruits of the 100 Masses offered for her suffering children, appears at Knock as Queen and Mediatrix contemplating, in the glory of heaven, the sacred mystery of the Lamb's redeeming sacrifice. For her and for her children, the Lamb of God is salvation, everlasting life, blessedness, and rest. Number 2, Saint Joseph and the apparition. Father Hubert writes at length about the significance of Saint Joseph in the apparition. In this programme, we can only mention a couple of points. At Knock, Saint Joseph appears reverently inclined towards the Blessed Virgin Mary, with his hands joined. He is interceding with the Heavenly Queen that the Church on earth, which is in his care, may attain to its final exaltation through her, and in her. He venerates the Blessed Virgin Mary as Queen of the Universal Church. She wears a crown. She is Queen. As we mentioned earlier, the apparition occurred on the eve of the Assumption octave. It was on her Assumption into heaven that the Blessed Virgin Mary was admitted to the beatific vision and exercised to the fullest extent her function as Queen. St. Joseph appears as patron of the Universal Church, which was proclaimed by Pope Blessed Pius IX on the 8th of December 1870. Number 3. Dogmas of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Apparition. Let us mention briefly some other points made by Father Hubert. At Knock, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared not as a young maiden, but as a fully matured and very beautiful. There is a certain appropriateness in her appearing thus, since the apparition, which has always been closely associated with the mystery of the Assumption, points at once to the consummation of her grace and to the term of her earthly sojourn. Father Hubert also quotes Monsignor Walsh. In regards to the timing of the apparition, it may be relevant to mention that the year 1879 marked the silver jubilee of Ineffabilis Deus, the definition of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, by Pope Blessed Pius IX. The 21st of August was the eve of the octave Assumption, and on the very day of the apparition, the 21st of August 1879, a statue of Our Lady was solemnly crowned by a papal legate at La Salette in France. If we take these circumstances into consideration, the apparition at Knock combines many of Our Lady's prerogatives: her Immaculate Conception, her Assumption, her Queenship, and her universal mediation. Let us close the programme with some miscellaneous points. Even though it was a silent apparition, it was a very profound apparition, being at the same time a Marian, Eucharistic and Scriptural apparition. Unlike other apparitions, the Blessed Virgin Mary did not rebuke or complain or ask for penance. Rather, she came to give compassion and comfort. Some say it was the Blessed Virgin Mary's thank you to the Irish people for their loyalty to the Mass and Rosary over the course of the centuries of persecution. The former witness, Patrick Walsh, was blessed in a major way. He was to see 3 of his sons ordained to the priesthood. The famine that occurred during 1879 was to be the last famine experienced by the Irish people. In the Irish language, Knock village is now known as Canuckwire, or Mary's Hill. In 1976, a new church was opened in Knock to cater for the increasing number of pilgrims. This was later raised to the dignity of a basilica. However, the greatest seal of approval from Rome was to come in 1979, the centenary year of the apparition. On the 30th of September of that year, Pope St. John Paul II visited the shrine and celebrated Mass there in the presence of hundreds of thousands of people. This episode of the History Programme was researched and presented by Fra Solanus for Gate of Heaven Radio. We hope you have enjoyed it and will join us again next month for another episode of the History Programme. For more information on Our Lady of Knock, you could visit the Shrine website www.ourladyofknock.com. knockshrine.ie. That's www.knockshrine.ie. Ave Maria.
Ave Maria, thank you, Fra Solanus. I have one thing I was going to ask, a simple question, and I know the answer, but you've been there, right?
Yes, I've been there a couple of times, yep.
Like what people, I haven't been there, I haven't visited a lot of shrines, I have barely been to any place in Europe, but with this shrine in particular, people, when they go someplace, they talk about, how they experience it, how it affects them personally. Some Marian shrines, for example, you might visit it and it really touches you, and other ones they maybe don't touch you so much. Is there something that, for you personally, that really, how did you respond to it?
The best place I found there, obviously, I suppose the most obvious place was the actual gable itself. The church gable is now, there's marble figures there to represent the figures that were seen in the Apparition, and it's covered in glass, and that's where they say Mass. And to me, when you go in there, it's actually, there's a great sense of holiness in the place. And the parish church is beautiful as well. I mean, that's just the gable of it, but you can still say Mass, of course, in the parish church. The parish church is very small, and there's a big basilica there, and there's nice places to walk around, like the Stations of the Cross. So it's a very prayerful place. When I was there, it wasn't as commercialised as some of the European shrines, like the ones on the continent. That may have changed, like that's back in the 90s. But the gable place where the Apparition occurred, there's a great sense of holiness, and you just know Our Lady and St. John and St. Joseph and did actually appear in the place. So yeah, it is a holy atmosphere there.
I was in Fatima and serving at the little altar of the outdoor shrine, and when you pass by the spot where Our Lady actually appeared, where they have the statue, and it's visually there's nothing there other than the statue, but to sort of think this actual spot right here, Our Lady appeared, it really touched me more than the whole shrine was nice, but the actual spot,
right,
it was special. And this here, because it was a stationary apparition and there was no message other than the visual, so that the visual, the location is really like almost more important than maybe some other apparitions. So it's interesting.
Yep.
So, I'm just wondering exactly where it is. How far from Dublin is it? How would you get there if you wanted to go?
There's an airport now in Knock. That's international. I know when I was in Boston Airport, they were flying from Boston into Knock, so it obviously can take big transatlantic airlines. I've never been to the airport. There's a railway station not far from there. It's about, if you're travelling from Dublin, I suppose it's just under 200 miles. I don't know what that is in kilometres, but it's about 200 miles from Dublin. There's when I left Ireland, they were building a lot of dual carriageways and motorways, so there may well be a bigger road there now than there was when I went there. So it's very accessible. It's very and very popular. I mean, all the parishes in Dublin and around, they do pilgrimages to Knock every year. It's the national shrine.
Yeah. Is it far from the coast, the west coast?
Knock, I'm not sure how far it is. I mean, from the west coast, it's in County Mayo. Mayo's fairly big as far as Irish counties go, but I'm not sure how far it is, to be honest with you.
Maria, Fra, you said, I think it was Marian McLaughlin and the others that first saw the apparition, that the figures were moving. Do we know what the figures were doing?
No, they may have thought that, like, I mean, in the distance. I mean, as far as I know, the figures were stationary. But I think at one stage, one youngster went up to try to touch them, and I think a woman went down to try to kiss Our Lady's feet, and they receded. but I'm not sure about movement. I think there were angels hovering around the altar. One of the witnesses said that there were angels hovering around the altar. So, but I think, I don't think Our Lady and St. Joseph and St. John were moving, but that sensation may have been like, when it was raining, don't forget as well. And the man out on the field just saw a great big light. So,
It's really amazing, isn't it? And how long afterwards did Knock actually change because of the apparition?
Well, I know that people went there fairly soon. The commission was set up by Archbishop MacHale, and he was coming to the end of his almost half a century as Archbishop there. He was Archbishop when he was very, very young. He was a great scholar himself and believed in the apparition. But as I said to you in the talk, it was a couple of years. A couple of years later, he was dead, and for some reason, I'm not sure if the next Archbishop was as enthusiastic about it as MacHale was, and it sort of died down a bit. What happened in Ireland, it seems to me that Lourdes took off very, very fast, and Lourdes is not. France is not that far away. From Ireland. And that was 1858, and that was approved, and that got recognition from the diocese very, very early, Lourdes, if memory serves me right. And a lot of Irish people started going to Lourdes in that 50-year gap, from 1880 to the 1930s. And even now, if you go to any parish church in Ireland, the shrine, the most popular image of Our Lady is Our Lady of Lourdes. It's not Our Lady of Knock. So there was a huge devotion to Our Lady of Lourdes in Ireland that started up early on, and who knows if the Knock apparition had been approved early on, maybe that might have been different. I don't know.
I see. So the Irish people didn't. You said that was their last famine, but they didn't actually prosper as such because from the apparition they didn't have people making pilgrimages.
Oh, there were pilgrimages there, yeah. Absolutely. Some of the foreign archbishops who were probably Irishmen, archbishops abroad, did go there earlier on, or at least knew about it, and what they used to get was a piece of the cement from the gable.
Oh.
People would post that. That's why they had to protect the gable eventually, because people were putting cement pieces from the gable in their eyes and in their ears and on their wounds. So there were miraculous cures, very early on, but on a wide scale, it didn't take off. For probably because the approval from the diocese didn't really come at that time, because MacHale, as I said, was dead, and so the Irish people, with their devotion to Our Lady, the next big apparition, I suppose, was Lourdes, and that took off. And even now, as I say, that's the statue you see. Even here, with a lot of the churches that were built by Irish priests, there's a statue of a grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes outside.
And yet Archbishop Clune here in Perth received a healing from...
That's right. Yeah, and he sent a picture then to Knock in Thanksgiving.
That's really something.
Yep.
Well, also, Fra, you said that was the last famine. So after this apparition, then really the Irish, because they've been so suppressed from what you'd said with the emancipation and what they've been suffering, but after that it seemed to change.
Well, there were no more famines, and they weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but at least they weren't starving to death.
Yeah.
So
something actually did really seem to change after that.
Yeah, as I said to you, that the consensus amongst a lot of scholars and theologians, and that is that the Our Lady appeared to thank them for their perseverance during the penal times, and she didn't say anything, but it was a great thing for the people in the west of Ireland who suffered probably the most during the penal times and the famine, because the land over there is not as good as anywhere else in the south or in the north or in the east. It's particularly bad in the west, so they were the poorest. And I mean, even I just read something there today that even at the time of the apparition, there were 18 families in the Knock vicinity who were evicted from their cabins, even during the time of the apparition. So the absentee landlordism was a big thing, and then there was a land league that developed. I think the land league started up actually in the same year, 1879, by Michael Davitt, if memory serves me right, and that was to sort of get more people to own the land. I mean, because most of the land was in the hands of a few big landowners who were based in England, and they were these people were tenants at the mercy of their bailiffs, and they showed no mercy a lot of the time,
They certainly were an inspiration for us today.
They were, and of course Knock was blessed with a very holy parish priest there as well, who not just had the devotion to the Holy Souls, but had the great devotion to the Mother of God, and the Immaculate Conception. He referred to Our Lady as the Ever Immaculate Mother of God. So I mean, and they say, some of the books, they say that like even though he didn't witness the apparition on the 21st of August, that he did have mystical experiences, like, I think he died about 20 years later or so, and he actually died on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. They say he did have mystical experiences, like, I mean, in his cabin, in his house, so, but he kept quiet. He was a very holy man. I think his cause may even have been opened.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig.
Okay, I'll be Marian.